Hi everyone, welcome to Viral Debuts. Today we are chatting with Jordan Kisner, the author of the gorgeous essay collection Thin Places. Jordan was such a pleasure to speak with, and lucky for her, she got to be my guinea pig. She was my first interview, so we got to work through a lot of technical glitches together, and she was absolutely lovely about it. One of my favorite parts of this interview with Jordan, one of the things she mentioned that I loved the most, besides all of it, was that her experience with putting this collection together. That when she wrote two of the main essays, one of them being the title essay, Thin Places, she knew there was more to say. And that was really what spurred this essay collection, and her knowing that it was a collection that would grow from the things that she wrote about in those initial essays, and that this voice would be so strong in these two pieces that she felt that it was a book. And I think that that is just such a wonderful and relatable thing about how writing happens. We write this thing that speaks to us, and it grows from there, and sometimes it morphs into this thing we never expected. And I loved hearing Jordan talk about that process. So thank you, Jordan, for sharing this time with us. And here you are, Jordan Kisner, the author of Thin Places. All right, so Thin Places, it came out on March 3rd. That's super exciting. How has the response been to it so far?
It's been great. It's very strange to put out a book instead of articles, which is something I'm a little bit more used to. Because with articles, it doesn't take people quite as long to read an article, and yet articles are also just by nature like maybe a little less personal. So I'm getting more notes on the book than I usually do, but with a longer delay, which is really nice. But something I didn't really expect about publishing a book is just the kind of love people want to give you for it, which is unexpected and wonderful.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, and you had a chance to do a few events before we all had to be quarantined.
I launched the book. I did a book launch, and that was beautiful and festive and celebratory. And lots of people were there because we were still able to do that. And then I did one event with Jessie, who you're talking to tomorrow, at the Harvard bookstore on the day that Harvard announced that it was closing for the year. And so that was a pretty strange vibe, and a much sort of more somber and empty event. And that was it. And we both the next day found out that our book tours were canceled, and that was sort of the end of the road. The very beginning, but also the end.
Like super exciting. And then
I feel really lucky to have gotten to launch the book with a big group of people and in a bookstore and in the flesh.
I know so many of the authors that I'm speaking with are saying, there's, some guilt tied to the feeling of like something that seems smaller than what's happening in the world, like a book launch or something, feeling upset about it. But it's so valid. Like, I think when you work on this really giant thing, no matter what it is, and you see it a certain way, that that would be really disappointing. So
it is disappointing. It is definitely put into nothing puts it in perspective like a world pandemic, right? These are all problems. Like a little bit of grief over a book, getting overshadowed is nowhere near the kinds of grief and worry that writers and all kinds of people are experiencing elsewhere in their lives right now. But everybody's in some kind of the same boat. I know. Everybody, a lot of jobs feel kind of uncertain right now.
I agree. I know there's just so much. It's all new territory for all of us. don't really know what to expect. And it's unsettling. So, and scary. But yeah, I was saying to somebody yesterday, like one of the things that I would do in a situation like this is like run to a bookstore and sit amongst books, like feel my people and my safe zone, and like it's just, yeah, it's just finding this whole new way of living and conducting life. And yes, but I agree. I mean, I keep reminding myself of that I feel lucky just to be in this space and healthy and, you know. Okay, so I'm absolutely in love with this collection. Thin
Thank you.
Places. I've been reading it. I've been recommending it. I have said your name a lot in the last few days. Yeah, I'm absolutely in love with it. As someone who writes essays, I'm like inspired by it. But I want you to tell me a little bit about what inspired it. The title essay. Obviously Thin Places is in the book, and I'm just curious how it kind of came together and where your jumping off point was.
Yeah, so I started the sort of earliest essays of this collection kind of a while ago, I think when I was about 25. And the first two essays that I wrote in this collection were Jesus Raves and Thin Places. And I had this feeling, and one is about an evangelical Christian church in New York City that was doing what they were calling a pop up church at the clubs and on the beaches in Montauk during the kind of like party scene of the summer there. And Thin Places is about obsessive compulsive disorder and an experimental neurosurgery that was being used to treat severe obsessive compulsive disorder, and some questions that raised for me about origins of consciousness and how we think about the mind versus the self. And those two essays do not sound like they are related at all. And yet, when I had finished writing both of them, I had this feeling like they were, in fact, in conversation with each other, and that there were more things that I hadn't quite finished connecting the dots between those two thoughts and some other things that were swirling around in my head, some other ideas I had about things I wanted to write that also felt connected. And often I feel like when I'm writing, I am trying to explain to myself, and then ultimately, hopefully, to a reader, why two things that seem to have nothing to do with each other have something to do with each other and must be in conversation with each other. And so those two essays were feeling like that at the time. And I started to use Thin Places, which is this notion I borrowed from Celtic mythology, which says that everywhere in the world, the distance between this world and the next world is only ever about 3 feet. So, like, just about an arm, just outside of arm's reach away. But that there are places in the world called thin places where that distance grows even closer, and the veil between the two worlds drops, and you can kind of glimpse another world or another way of being.
I love that.
And I liked that as a metaphor for examining ways, places, moments where you could start to see a dissolve between the self and the other, the individual and the body politic, the real and the unreal.
Right.
And all of those kinds of dissolutions, were curious to me, I think, for a sort of a set of reasons that I kept circling. And so I just kept building and building and building until I felt like I had finished the thought. There's a very short essay in the book where I quote this beautiful musician, Lassa DeSella, when she's talking about her father, thinking that sometimes we have thoughts that take many years to finish thinking. It takes you many years to finish a thought. And this essay was the many years of thinking it took me to finish this thought that I was trying to come up with about what a thin place was.
Yeah, I love that. And on the note of that short essay, this is like a little a sidebar. I became curious when I was reading, as you were structuring this, did you was there is there ever like a purposefulness in how you're putting these like I love when there's like a short essay that kind of gives a little bit of levity from something that was, longer or heavier, or how much of that plays a role, I guess, in how you're putting your essays together, or is it more about this A to Z story that you're telling of, the whole story?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually wound up writing more of those little short essays and inserting them to kind of break up the longer
Yeah,
essays.
I love that.
My my natural habit is to write these big, like 12,000 word behemoth essays that try to really like totally get my arms around some big set of ideas, or some big story.
Right.
And they can be research dense, they can be character dense, they can be, they can be kind of a lot. And so hopefully they're compelling, but when you string a whole bunch of them together in a row, I got some feedback that it felt like you needed just a little bit of a breath in between to kind of buoy you, to give you a little bit of a break from having to hold the amount of content that a really long essay asks you to hold in your mind. So that I wound up coming up with more short essays to kind of help create those catch steps, and to just create some linking thoughts between some of the larger essays. Help you connect the essay about a debutante ball with the essay about neurosurgery. And then, but then in terms of ordering, in general, I was trying to tell loosely almost a quest narrative, where the first essay in the book was written when I was, or at least begun, at the very, it was the earliest material I wrote. The first material I wrote, I actually didn't finish that essay until after I'd finished everything else, but I started it before I wrote anything else. And so at the beginning of the book, I am, as the writer and the narrator, sort of at my youngest, and articulating to myself this problem and set of questions that I want to see if I can solve. And then the book is a little bit of a journeying kind of through different parts of America to talk to different people to try to answer that question. And then the end is me, almost present day, kind of reflecting on that journey. So there was a little bit of pacing, and then a little bit of a grand
little narrative. Bit of both. Yeah. I get that sense. And I love that, like I said, I love those little short pieces anyway, although I'm terrible at them personally. Like, I'm more like you, where I'm like, let's fit but everything that went with this story into one essay. You do it really well, and I love those little breaths, like you said, to take in between. So I love that it was purposeful and also just part of this longer flow of things. I just think that's great. I was going to ask you something that you said about starting it when you were younger and it being this personal journey. I'm curious, like, as you're writing, how much of, I guess, where, for some of these essays, where are you when you just hear, that one thing that's like a great jumping off point for this larger idea, or, that it's going to play a bigger, do you have an example of something that, like, you hear and you knew that it was going to play this bigger role in this journey of researching something, or discovering something about yourself, I guess, in one of these essays,
In a way, I think all of them came out of that kind of moment of hearing something or reading something, and some spark of fascination emerging. So, for example, one of the most important essays in the book is about a debutante ball that takes place down on the border between Texas and Mexico, in Laredo, which is itself sort of one metropolitan area that is divided by the border.
Right.
And there's a Texas side and a Mexico side, and this debutante ball, it's comprised, it's like the largest George Washington's birthday celebration in the country every year. It has a really interesting and depending on who you ask, kind of troubling cultural history. And its crown jewel is the biggest event of this month-long festival is a debutante ball, where kind of the creme de la creme of Laredo society, their daughters, who are, 97% of Laredo is Mexican American. So they're Mexican American women dressing up in these unbelievably ornate $30,000 ball gowns to sort of mimic and honor Martha Washington and George Washington. And it's an unbelievably strange set of cultural connections and tensions all happening in this event. And I learned about it just because someone was at my house for dinner and said, "Oh, did you ever see that documentary about the girls who dress up like Martha Washington on the border of Mexico?" And I thought,
yeah.
yeah, that sounds wild. And and it was also, that was interesting to me because my mother's family is from a border town in Mexico,
right,
and is a Mexican American family. And I am a usually white passing half Mexican American woman, and so the tensions between who gets to be American and who doesn't get to be American, and how do those issues have something to do with race, but also class,
right,
and national history and all that kind of stuff, felt really, really bound up in that essay, and even just in that sentence. Did you ever see that documentary?
Yes. Yeah.
Like Martha Washington on the border. And so most essays came out of some moment like that, where someone said, "Oh, did you ever hear about?" Or reading something like Mary Ruefle. I was reading Mary Ruefle's beautiful collection of lectures called Madness, Rack, and Honey. And they're like a 2-paragraph bit in one of them about Shaker architecture and how Shakers design their houses to be kind of mirror images of each other. So there's this invisible meridian line down the middle of their houses, and the men live on one side, and then on the mirror image opposite, the women would live on the other. And I was fascinated. That lit up my little light bulb, and I felt like I wanted to read everything about that, and then that turned into an essay.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
You're fine.
You can hear that.
No, you're fine. It's all right. That's why we have editing tools.
And so it comes from everywhere. And to me, I feel like the work of making an essay, or especially making a collection of essays, is trying to understand why all of those dings were mine.
I totally get that.
Why they lived together in my mind.
Right.
Why they felt connected. Why they are connected. Why Shaker architecture has something to do with the Dust Bowl that was created in California because we rerouted all the natural water to Los Angeles, is connected to the debutante ball on the border, is connected to my grandmother, is connected, all of that. And so for me, it's about trying to pay attention to when I feel like I want to go down a rabbit hole.
Right.
And why these rabbit holes are the ones that attract me.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's like when you become fixated on, it's just this knowing that this is staying with you for some reason, and okay, let's go see what this is, what this is all about. Yeah.
I always say to my students, for a time I was teaching freshmen, and they were kind of new to college level writing, and they would have to be coming up with essay ideas rather than being given very, very specific prompts, which is maybe more often the case in high school. And they'd always come to me and be like, "What do I write about?" And it's like, what's bothering you? Mm-hmm. What's on your mind? What are you Googling obsessively, even though you're not totally sure why it's interesting to you? What are you up in the middle of the night thinking about? That's what you should write about. Right. Whatever is stuck in your head.
Yeah.
The thing.
Do you feel like when you're in that, when you go down that hole, you are living obsessively in that world for a period of time? For example, I'm working on my own stuff, and then sometimes I feel like I look at all of the literature around me that I find inspiring, and I'm like, I'm writing about a lot of mother-daughter stuff right now, and the word mother or body or flesh is on all of my books and stuff, and
do you think that like there's just this divided, I think, school of thought where like you know, you don't read anything that's related to the thing that you're about to write about, and you like, you know, if you're a nonfiction writer, you read fiction, or like, and then other people are like, no, read every single thing that you can about the thing that you're about to write about and compare it to other people's and learn from it, you know. Which way do you think that you know, are you more the kind of person that's like, give me all the information you got and I'll go from there, or are you kind of like, you have enough and
I try to err on the side of over reading,
mm-hmm.
largely because the kind of reported and researched essay I'm doing usually draws on vast histories of like lived experience and scholarship that exists already.
Mm-hmm.
And my job is to navigate it, discover it, be a good presenter of that information to a reader. Often I kind of think that it's your job, if you're going to be somebody who doesn't write from any one subject, on any one sort of set of field expertise, that it's incumbent upon you to educate yourself about what has already been said and written. And I'm speaking very broadly, so
Yeah.
like maybe I'll be more specific. So, for example, there is one essay in the book that is about the cultural history of tattooing and inscribing the body, and specifically like the way that tattooing as a cultural practice was racialized in America in the 17, 18, 19, early 1900s.
Right.
And I was curious about that, and I felt like it was my job to read as much theory about, you know, tattooing
Right.
and bodily inscription as possible. You know, like read the history of it, read primary material, because I don't know, and that's a real existing field, and I don't think it would have been appropriate for me to be trying to write about that without having done an adequate amount of research.
Right.
Now, I completely understand why some people say, I don't want to, if I'm writing a biography of Norman Mailer, I don't want to read the existing biographies of Norman Mailer because I'm trying to, you know, create my own thing. And I totally hear that argument. That so far is not really the kind of writing I'm doing. I'm not usually creating, needing to kind of create a brand new contribution to
Right.
a genre where there are comps already. It's more like collaging and reporting and researching and discovering. And so to me, it feels like my responsibility to be as well read as I can be reasonably.
Mm-hmm.
And also, reading is the thing that I do when I get stuck, when I can't write. It's always the thing that makes me excited to come up with another sentence. And
Right.
so I err on the side of like mountains of books.
Right. That's such a good distinction, though, because I think that, you know, we get stuck in these like how things are supposed to be, you know, as a writer, the way they're supposed to look, and that's such an important distinction that you just made. Like, you know, for the work that you're doing, you aren't the expert in that particular thing, and so yes, you welcome up. But there might be another situation for a writer where they are the particular expert, like you said, or it is a biography about a person, and there's only so much to be, and
Or
that's
if
so
it's a
true.
novel and they just really want to live in the
Yeah,
world of their novel,
it's
which
so
is
true.
completely valid. That's just so far, at least for the material of this book,
Right.
was not
Yeah.
the situation for me.
Yeah, that's so important. And on the note of the way things are supposed to be, I wanted to ask you about your writing process, because I think that there is like such a you know, a thought that it has to, again, like look a certain way, and we hear these stories of people that are just like incredibly structured, and I know for myself at least, I'm always beating myself up that I'm not incredibly structured. And I also love to hear the versions of writers who are like, you know, typing out things on their iPhones on a subway. So what does your writing process look like? You know,
I don't have any one standard writing process, which is something that I have felt a lot of struggle and frustration and embarrassment and shame about over time. I'm somebody who probably needs routine, but desperately resists routine. It's one of my foibles. So my general strategy is to do whatever I can, however I can sort of get myself to sit down and write something, anything in a day is really good. So if it's sometimes it's typing into my notes app on my phone on the subway. Lately, I've been trying to do morning pages or an adapted version of morning pages from The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Just so that like anything that will sort of get me having committed, taken words out of my head and committed them externally onto paper or onto a device somewhere. And that kind of echoes this philosophy, this idea that I think is kind of wrong, but is useful to me, which is that I heard somebody say a writer is someone who wrote today, which I like because it kind of de-escalates the project of being a writer. It makes it very simple. Like all you have to have done is written something.
Exactly.
But literally speaking, it's not true. I don't write every day. Lots of professional and brilliant and geniusy writers don't write every day.
Right.
But for me, my target is like, can I have written even a note? Can I just have taken some notes today?
Right.
And a lot of days I don't manage that. In many days, despite all of my trickery with my own self, am not really able to get myself to write. And so the other kind of main strategy that I have to write is that I set deadlines where I'm accountable to other people for producing something.
Yes.
And so sometimes that means pitching, which is something that nonfiction writers and journalists are fortunate to be able to do. It doesn't really work that way when you're writing a novel.
So true, yeah.
I can pitch an idea and then I owe it and have a deadline for an editor, and I don't want to disappoint the editor, and that will get me writing. Or writing groups, accountability partners, whatever that looks like. And so I don't know. My writing process in that sense is very cobbled together. I notice that I do a little better when I write by hand.
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask you that next. Do you find yourself in those, especially early versions, or just in general, you like to do that? You said morning pages, which made me think of that, longhand, just like stream of consciousness. And
I do find that when I'm writing by hand, it matches the pace of my thoughts better in some way, which is to say that I think when I'm writing by hand, it gives me enough time, because my hand is slower than my type, like my writing is slower than my type. It gives me enough time to kind of like slightly edit the sentence as I'm going, rather than spitting the sentence out really fast and then wanting to go back and fix it. So writing keeps me, because it's slower and you can't delete and go back and do it over and over and over again, keeps me moving sort of more forward in a way that can be very helpful. So especially when I'm feeling stuck. I also just hate how much I have to look at a screen.
Oh, I know. I say that all the time. By the end of the day, I feel like my brain is bleeding. I'm like, I gotta just like look at a piece of paper, and I totally get that. Yeah.
I wish I should write by hand more than I do, because I find it really great when I do.
I totally agree.
So that's something I try to use a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think for me, like that self-edit feature is turned off when I'm writing by hand. I tend to just, it somehow doesn't seem as permanent or something. I don't know what it is, but I just feel like, I don't know, maybe it is the computer and the spell check and all that, those tools that are available to you. There's something with that pen and paper. I don't stop as much, where I feel like, is that what, I just don't self-edit. It's like this, it's very stream of consciousness, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I was going to ask, what are you working on now? What's anything?
Right now I'm working on a few short freelance pieces. The whole, I was intending to be mostly not working a bunch of new things this month, because I was supposed to be traveling and talking to people and doing book events. And I had given, after sort of the great hustle coming up to the book launch, I didn't plan a lot for March, to give myself a breath. And so now that I'm kind of trying to reconfigure that, figure out what my livelihood looks like and what the industry looks like as a freelancer. Doing some freelance pieces, some shorter freelance pieces, starting to sort of think about and generate a couple longer, more kind of feature length freelance pieces. I am working on the very early stages of a second book draft, and I'm working on a podcast. I have a podcast that's weekly, and so that is also keeping me on a kind of a weekly deadline, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really exciting. Is it something people can find now, or you're just getting it?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Released it 2 weeks ago. It's an interview series with authors about.
Oh wait, is this the one on long reads?
Yes.
Or no, I'm sorry, Lit Hub. Right?
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think but
Lit Hub. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a collaboration between Lit Hub Radio and FSG, which is
okay. Yeah, I'm like confusing all that. You're Alexander Chi, right?
Right. Yesterday we released my interview with Alex Chi. The week before, we released an interview with Mira Jacob.
That's awesome.
And we've got, several. It's a limited run podcast. It's only going to be maybe 6 or 8 episodes, and I get to talk to Carmen Maria Machado and Jawad and Tara Westover and all these brilliant people, which has been really a thrill. And so I am very cheerfully working on that right now, and I feel very lucky that can kind of be done from anywhere.
Yeah, that's how I feel talking to all of you. I'm like, I get to interview all of these wonderful people who inspire me. So yeah, that's so exciting. I saw the podcast, and I have this, like, people are doing such wonderful things in the midst of all of this, and so I just have this like running list of like things I need to go listen to or do, or whatever. I took a drawing class today with my daughter. It's like 20 minutes with Mo Williams, but he's doing these cartoons.
Hearing about
it's so cute. And we drew the pigeon, and like, it's just like, people are just really wonderful, and like the things that they're trying to create, and it's really cool. So who are you reading? Who are you loving right now?
Well, I just, because we were doing this event together, fully reread Jessie Ujeska Stevens' book, The Exhibition of Persephone Q. And Jessie and I we're in a writing group together, and so we actually helped edit pieces. I've seen pieces of her book.
I love that.
And she had seen pieces of mine. So it was not my first time reading parts of her book, but I'd never read the whole thing put all together in the final edit front to back. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I read that recently. I recently read Catherine Lacey's forthcoming book, Pew novel, which I loved. It's just so, I don't know. I opened it and was kind of tired when I was like going to bed, and I was kind of tired, and I opened it, and thinking I was, probably going to read a page or two and fall asleep. Right. And then it was like 40 pages later, and I was like this with the book. Oh. So I thought it was really and humane and gorgeous, and kind of a page turner in a way that feels really good.
Yeah.
And then I finished recently Kate Zambrino's book Drifts, which is a novel sort of in diary entry and essay. And Kate is a brilliant person and a brilliant writer. I was lucky to get to study with her when I was a graduate student, and now we teach in the same program. And so I just I'm hungry to read everything she writes.
Yeah.
And I really loved this. It's a writer living in Brooklyn, kind of struggling through writing a book while also kind of meditating on the life and the work life of Rilke, the poet Rilke. So that was a joy. And then just now, last night, I started rereading On Immunity by Eula Biss.
Yeah.
Beautiful nonfiction book about when written a few years ago when she was trying to navigate the to vaccinate, not to vaccinate debate. She did a lot of research into the theories of immunity and herd immunity and what we owe to each other in terms of our own um, medical decisions and physical health. And it's a very interesting thing to
Yeah,
revisit.
I was gonna say it's very timely.
I like grabbed it off my shelf because I was like, it's let's revisit
Yes.
this and see how it reads now.
Right. I know. I love when you read something at different phases of your life and it means something totally different. And I would imagine that one definitely means something different today. Yeah, that's interesting. I actually haven't I've heard so much about that book and I haven't read it, so I'm gonna have to check it out. It sounds very interesting.
Great,
Um
highly recommend it.
yeah. Okay, well thank you for chatting with me. It was so
Thank
nice to
you.
connect with you. Yeah.
That's such a treat to get to
Yeah.
meet
Yes,
and
I know.
meet as much as we can meet each other right now.
I know. I know. Yeah, I'm hoping that everybody feels a little more connected by these different things and ways for people to, stay in touch and in the loop. And yeah, so thank you.